Ready to start. Good morning, all. On behalf of the organizing team members on the slide here, a warm welcome to you all to these two consecutive webinars today marking the International Women's Day, all about inspiration and leadership. The first webinar is going to be about growing a business. Could we please ask anyone who have joined to mute yourself and turn off your camera? We are grateful for the support and the sponsorship that has been offered here today by three great companies, Goodwill, Vestra, and the Ruby Cup. Please look to support them or seek them up and find out who they are about, as they are supporting the associations and the chambers of commerce who are here today. Without that kind of support, it'll be a bit difficult to put on events like this these days. A few house rules before we kick off. Note this event is being recorded and we will be sharing it post-event. Please, as mentioned, mute your microphone and camera. And if you do have any questions, then please use the chat function and type them in there rather sooner than later, because we have a very strict time limit and therefore we would like to get through as many of them as possible. So don't hold back. Without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to bid you welcome to our welcome speaker, Emma Hopkins, Ambassador Emma Hopkins. She took on her post as ambassador for the for Great Britain, for the United Kingdom, to Denmark in October 2020. Prior to that, she had a ambassador role for Bulgaria. She was awarded the Officer of the Most Excellent Order of the British Empire, an OBE, in the 2014 Queen's Birthday Honour List for services preventing sexual violence in conflict-affected countries around the world. Something she in particular has been focusing a lot on around crime, rule of law, modern slavery, Central Europe, Eastern Europe, for example, but also elsewhere. She has worked on immigration, asylum, human rights, international criminal law, organized crime, and as mentioned also as well, violence against women. So with that, Ambassador, can I ask you to unmute yourself, turn on your camera and bid the welcome. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Gunnar, and thank you to the invitation to be here today from the Danish-UK Association and the British Chamber of Commerce in Denmark. I both love and hate the 8th of March because it feels like every year for the last 20 years I've been giving the same speech, and luckily I have lots of material to draw from. But it's the one day where we shine the spotlight on the state of gender equality in the world today. And it's a one day when we raise our voices and we collectively say that progress isn't enough. And today there'll be the usual dissection of data demonstrating that we've taken some steps forward in some areas, but it will also show some quite deliberate steps backwards. And I think COVID also means that steps backward will also be very significant in the years to come. I made a decision a few years ago that I wouldn't participate in any events on International Women's Day which didn't have a positive and concrete focus, with some suggestions on what we as individuals can do, as well as organisations can do to improve the situation.
Feeling better again.
So I think somebody is seated, maybe with some kids at home. I know everyone's juggling, so I've been there as well. Thank you very much. So to open this event today, I just want to make a few remarks about the global picture before focusing a little bit on women in business, which I know this discussion is focused on, and then offer a few thoughts on what we as individuals in business or in government can do to support equality in the workplace. So what's the big picture? From my perspective, having looked at the data over the weekend, I was surprised again to see that the overall global gender gap will close in 108 years. And the most challenging aspect of that gender gap, the economic empowerment dimension, will take 202 years on current progress. That's staggering, but also it doesn't seem to be shortening every year. And if we zoom into the business environment in the UK, of course, that's what I know. I read that today in the UK, the gender pay gap which is about equal pay for the same work, is at a record low of 15.5%, and the full-time figure is 7%. And I was surprised at the way in which these figures were presented. Using the term record low, I suppose, is a different way of looking at it, to describe the fact that 15% of women are still paid less for the same work. And that is something that still persists today. Having said that, the reason we know that is because in 2017, the government enacted some legislation which requires large employers to publish the difference in salaries and bonuses. And that's been tremendously useful in order to shine a spotlight. Many of you will have seen the very publicised cases in the BBC, for example, which showed the difference that men and women were being paid for effectively the same work. So data is crucial, and another review in 2019 showed that female-led businesses also receive less funding at every stage, and women are half as likely as men to start their own business, and 81% of women are less likely than men to feel they have access to the requisite funds in order to do that. So several years ago, the UK appointed an independent panel called the Hampton-Alexander Review, which basically looked at how we ensure that talented women at the top of business are recognised, promoted and rewarded. And that review was looking particularly at two very important gender diversity targets, and encouraging voluntary regulation rather than quotas. And a few weeks ago, I saw that the latest and final report was published. Fact UK hit one of these gender targets, which was that 33% of boards in the top 350 UK listed companies are female. In fact, 34.6% are, so we hit that target. But what we didn't do was hit the target of 33% of women which were in the leadership teams of firms listed on the stock exchange, FTSE 100 and 250 indices. So the women in executive roles hadn't managed to achieve that target, and it looked at 2 layers before boards. So that leaves the UK, I think, 5th internationally, and the 4 countries above us are ones that introduce quota systems rather than a voluntary one. And this review, from my perspective, is important because it was a catalyst for change. And some of the key recommendations coming out of it are very important, and try to kill that perception that one and then done approach to boards, which we'd seen for many years, where a token woman had been put onto a board in order to achieve those targets. And I also tried to have a look at the Danish figures, and I see that when trying to have some kind of equivalence with the UK indices, 31% of all board members in C25 index and other unlisted largest companies, 100 of them, are women in Denmark. So we're in the same ballpark. But it's not a final state, I hope, and we'll continue to push for more work, especially at the executive level. So it's not just non-executive board appointments, but it's executive roles, not just HR director, but also finance director and other key roles that are predominantly male in businesses today. So that top-down approach, that governmental approach on legislation is important, but it's also really important that we have a bottom-up approach too. And one thing I love about International Women's Day this year is the theme, the Choose to Challenge theme, underlining that we all have this collective responsibility to challenge. And when I was doing work on sexual violence for many years, we had this brilliant Australian general called General Morrison, who gave a speech, who said that the standards we walk past are the standards that we accept. And that very much applies in this field also. So the standard that you accept as part of your workplace is the standard that you walk by. So what can we do? Just wanted to offer a few thoughts in an effort to be concrete on International Women's Day. First, a suggestion I would make is that if you're a female leader of an organisation, you inherit a set of practices that aren't the ones you necessarily need to perpetuate. Very often, organisational culture is steeped in tradition and hierarchy, and that disadvantages women. Opaque processes normally disadvantage women and perpetuate prejudice. So ask questions about why things are done if you're in a position to do so. Challenge male-only shortlists, interview panels, and speaking panels. Second thing I want to offer is, if you can, set your own rules and model the behaviours you believe in. If work-life balance is important, go home on time and show your staff that you're doing that. Don't start meetings early if they disadvantage parents dropping off kids at school. Promote flexible working, but be honest about the challenges that you face and the balls that you drop from time to time. It makes you more credible as a leader and a role model. The third thing I'd say is you've got to pay attention to HR practices. The way organisations recruit and appraise is crucial, and you have to address unconscious bias and recruiting in your own likeness. So you need pro-family policies, extensive mentoring in your talent pipeline, and you crucially need objective, competency-based interviews. Fourth thing I'd say is be careful about language. Call out language that perpetuates stereotypes. I was once told when I was applying for a job that they needed a big hitter for this role. Immediately a phrase I felt that excluded me. I was told in another context that I needed to grow some balls in order to tackle an issue. So this type of language perpetuates the gender stereotypes that we're trying to ameliorate. One other thing I'd suggest is that targets are really important. What measured gets done normally. So targets are important because they hold senior leadership to account. And you need the data to be able to show whether or not you're meeting those targets. Last thing about International Women's Day is perhaps something you can do to support other women in your workplace. You can take a junior woman to a meeting, you can offer some constructive feedback, you can mentor women in your teams, and you can stand up and not enable conduct or language that is prejudicial. And I think the last thing on that vein is that for the last few years, I've run a competition on International Women's Day, which is aimed at supporting girls aimed between 14 and 17 to think about their own leadership and to have confidence in themselves. And I picked that age group because the data and research tells us, in fact, that it's at that age that girls' confidence takes a dive. And as a result, it limits their appetite for risk-taking, which has an impact on their future career choices. So today we're launching our competition again for the first time in Denmark. It's called Ambassador for the Day. And it started off as a way of getting women into diplomacy, but it's developed into a way of getting girls to think about their own leadership potential and the impact that they can have on their communities. Today, we've got 10 other female ambassadors signed up in Denmark to support and mentor these girls. We're working with NGOs in different areas for them also to promote the competition. And I hope to include business leaders too. It's a small contribution, but one that I've seen over the last few years has had a big impact of the girls involved in terms of their confidence to believe in themselves. So I think I'd close by saying, and I'm looking forward to hearing the very interesting panel and their takes on growing a business and what contribution you can make in that space. But I would just say continue to be ambitious would be my advice, enabling yourself and others to reach their potential. And instead of talking about record lows, I'd still look at the equality and the gender gap as being something that's just totally unacceptable. So continue to be outraged when equality isn't the predominant feature that you see. I think that's the only way to approach things if we are going to make progress in the future. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Hopkins. I dare say those points that you raised there are not only for women, those can also be listened to and followed by men. Let's move on to start the panel, and for that we have no other than Tine Jersing Knudsen as the moderator today. Tine is the UK correspondent for the Danish Broadcasting Corporation and is a well-known and respected journalist, in particular on her investigative journalism that she's been doing for a long time already. Tine, like all the speakers on the panel today, I should say, are doing this job pro bono. They're not being paid for this. They are here to offer their time, their insights, their lessons learned and observations for us all to use and take away. And for that, we are tremendously grateful. And with that, Tine, can I ask you to take it from here, please?
You definitely can, Gunnar. Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here today. We have an incredible panel, and I think that the Ambassador Hopkins now just kind of provided the most perfect backdrop for the discussion that we're going to have. We've spoken beforehand, me and the four panelists, about what we would like to discuss. Time is short, so we are going to do 30 minutes, very focused discussion on how we can get more women in business in all of the countries which are involved in this panel today. On the panel, we have Milena Kotevska, Head of Operations at Rockamore, the scientifically proven shoes who relieve pressure from your forefoot, among others. I think that most women will know them who are here today listening in. Then we have Sasha Celestial One, who is tackling food waste with a free app, which is harnessing the power of mobile technology and sharing economy to provide a revolutionary solution to the problem. We also have Zoe Henderson, who wants more from alcohol-free beer, I was going to say. And Zoe is going to tell us a lot more about her exciting beer. And then we have Julie Vejgaard Kjær, who is the co-founder and CEO of Ruby Cup, the menstrual cup, who she will also be telling a lot more about. I won't do a much longer introduction here because I think we should just go ahead and get started. And I've told them to share what they would like to tell us about their businesses kind of as we go. So when we look at the statistics, it's not looking great for Denmark, for the UK, for Finland, or for Norway, none of us. There aren't many women in businesses, and we want more women in businesses. That's what we're here to discuss. So if I just start out from the top with you, Milena Kotevska, Head of Operations at Rockamore. Why are there that few women in female entrepreneurs?
I think personally it has a lot to do with the way women are often raised. And I think a lot of it comes from the family and from the environment you grow up in. But generally, a lot of women recognize the fact that it is considered better not to have too strong opinions, not to be very aggressive, not to be too assertive. And we can tend to be a bit careful about coming off as too arrogant. Whereas I personally think in certain situations, there is nothing wrong with being a little bit aggressive, with being loud about exactly what you want and how you want to do it. And again, I think a lot of it comes from the environments where we study and work, but also from the family where girls can be encouraged to take the space that they need to take. And this is also something really believing in the company, that women should not feel uncomfortable about taking up the space that they feel like they should take, about being loud, about being ambitious. We should own that feeling and that ambition in order to then go further, if that makes sense.
And Milena, I'm curious, when did you realize that this was an issue, that it started in the upbringing of girls?
Actually, quite late, because I can say that my parents have never spoken about this to me in a very explicit way, because it was always understood that because being a girl or a boy is so much the same in terms of our ambitions, in terms of our goals, that they haven't thought that it's necessary to discuss it in such terms as, I'm teaching you this because you're a girl. For them, it has been part of the basic level of upbringing. And for me, it has always been something that's innate. And only later when I grew up, maybe after my teenage years, and I realized that that's actually not the status outside of home. That's not how it is everywhere. For me, something clicked. And then I realized, okay, then something else has to be done, because I realized that home is not how the world is.
Thank you, Milena. Let's move on to you, Sasha. Sasha, I want to kind of stay in the same lane here, but maybe focus a bit more about what is it, not with girls and women themselves, that is keeping them from being entrepreneurs? What is it with society and the way that entrepreneurship works that keeps women from being entrepreneurs?
I think there's sort of two elements, and they're part of the same sort of vicious circle. There's a real lack of funding available or that is allocated towards female founders. So in the UK, less than 1% of all venture capital funding went to female founded teams last year. 89% went to male founded teams, and 10% went to mixed gender teams. And it's the same when you look at the US. And so even if you've got, a third of all entrepreneurs being female, if they're only accessing a tiny fraction of the available capital. It's going to be very hard to grow thriving businesses. And then that gets us into the next problem, which is there aren't very many role models out there. And when you think about sort of successful tech entrepreneurs specifically, they're all in California, they're mostly white, and they're all male. And so we've got this sort of cycle going on where we don't have enough role models, which is why it's so important one day a year to step back and celebrate females in business. But I think we have to do that every day, right? If we really want to have change, it can't be something that just happens once a year.
So, Sasha, what Milena is talking about is also something that's inside of women. It's how we're brought up. There's some obstacles as to become a female entrepreneur. And what you're saying is once then you have actually become an entrepreneur and you have a business going, then there's still obstacles facing you. How have you dealt with, how have you dealt with these structural obstacles?
Well, to be honest, we realized quite early on that we had a much higher success rate pitching to female venture capitalists than to male. Olio is an app which connects neighbors to share food and household items so they don't go to waste. And it turns out that we're a very female product. 75 to 80% of the people who use our app, and we have several million all over the world, are women. And similarly, women investors were the ones who understood that this was a problem and a pain point for mostly other women and could turn into something that was worth investing in. The problem is that I think only 6 or 7% of venture capitalists are female. So we have to have representation at that investment level as well, so that can trickle down into investment into products that are for women and also run by women.
Thank you, Sasha. Zoe, let's move on to you. You have this incredibly funky, I was going to say, craft beer you're developing, or you're selling, of course. But I wonder, in what specific terms, like what specific times in your career have you realized that there were kind of a different set of rules for you because you were a woman, and a different kind of rules for men?
Yeah, I think I started my first business really young. I was only 26, and I had a male business partner. And I would notice when we were, going to meetings with maybe more traditional old white men, so our bank account, our bankers, our accountants, this was about 12 years ago, so there were less kind of online packages. We went to the bank for a loan, and we had like an old school accountant, and I would always find, in meetings, the conversation would be directed to my partner rather than to me, and it would drive me crazy. I think being a woman and being younger as well definitely presented some challenges, and I think it's only as you kind of get into business, and if you can have the confidence and the faith to go, right, I'm going to start my own business, and you've overcome all those barriers, whether they're in your family, in your culture, your internal barriers, and you've got there and you've done it, and then only when you start to kind of get into business and into business situations, do you start to see that there are other barriers, and that you're kind of moving in circles that are very male dominated. And I think it's interesting when we were talking about confidence, and it's that fine line between when a woman is confident and says what she wants, and is assertive, it's classed as aggression, or bossy, or all other kinds of negative connotations, where if it was a man behaving like that, you wouldn't have those negative connotations. So it's definitely interesting seeing how people perceive you.
That's so interesting, what you say, Zoe, and I'm sure that many women who are listening in today, who are very welcome to ask questions, I should say. I forgot to say that in the introduction. Please write your questions in the chat. We're going to do 10-15 minutes at the end where we pick up on all the questions. But Zoe, when you met these prejudices, these discriminations towards you because of your gender, how did you turn that into action instead of becoming sad and stop being an entrepreneur?
I think very early on, I thought one thing that you can do is you need to have your shit together. You need to have you need to know your facts, you need to know your figures, you need to know what you're talking about, and that's the way that you can prevail. If somebody is isn't addressing you in a meeting, if they're not talking to you and giving you the respect that you deserve, I think if you know what your business, if you know what you're talking about, and you're assertive with that, then there's no argument, and then there's no kind of pushback or excuses that they can make or put on you because of your gender. So very early on, I kind of watched men in a corporate environment when I was working, and then later on as an entrepreneur and as a founder and going to lots of networking events. I've always just watched how men have behaved. And it's interesting, I grew up in an all-female household. My father wasn't around, and I was brought up by my mum and my granny and my aunties. So but growing up, I always looked at how men behaved, and I always saw how they were more assertive, and they did ask for more things, and they did question more. And from a very early age, I kind of adopted that, and I thought, well, why can't I behave like that? And I think knowing what you're talking about and kind of seeing how other people get to where they get to and how they behave is a good way to watch it. Obviously, with your feminine touch on it, of course.
Let's get back to the feminine touch a little later on. Julie, I want to go over to you now. As the founder and CEO of Rubicop, you are kind of hit by prejudice against your gender in a double kind of way, I almost want to say, because you're dealing with something that's only related to women having your menstruation, and you're also a woman yourself. So I wonder what sort of obstacles you've met on your way to building your business.
Yes. Yeah, I think there are a couple of, I've encountered a lot of different situations, but there are a couple that stand out. I think in the beginning, when we were starting out and also doing a lot of work, trying to raise funds, doing pitches, doing competitions, doing all of these things, the majority of that environment is male, right? I remember when you would be talking at events or networking or whatever, that there was sometimes a conversation, and I would say, hey, I'm Julie, and I'm with Rubicop, and this is what we're doing. And then after a while, it would be like, oh, so what is your role in the company? You know, kind of this assumption that I'm an employee, or I'm not actually the CEO and the founder. So we've met that, and I think something that I figured out very early on, because our product is very much for women, is that, but we have to have get the men into the conversation, no, and because it's for equality, they need to be part of this and also understand menstruation and what it is. So I quickly found a way to present it from an economic point of view, and not so much about this is a really great product for your period, but in the sense of explaining to rooms with a lot of men how costly it is, you know, how much a household budget is in terms of spending on pads and tampons, or how much money you can save with a sustainable period product. So that became my approach very early on, to kind of go to the male part of the conversation like that.
And how did you feel about doing that, Julie? Because for having your menstruation in many parts of the world is something that is holding women and girls back. So that's a very personal thing that's got to do with your life and your values, and much softer things than economics. So how did you feel about having to focus on finances to get men on board?
Well, I think it's important as an entrepreneur and as a founder of a business to have that in mind as well. It's a really, really important aspect, both of the business model, of course. There's a bottom line, and there has to be economic incentive. And if that's a way to kind of bridge or open the conversation, I think that's fine for me. Because if you go to a man, not all the time. A lot of men are curious, and they're like, oh, what is this product? And that's interesting. But if it's a way of not having the person turn away right away because they are not feeling comfortable about talking about periods, then it's a good way of kind of bridging that conversation.
Bridging the conversations. Milena, this is actually something we discussed as well before the panel today. We spoke about how you at Rockamore, you don't mind walking into a room that's full of men, and you will wear something of color, like a floral dress. You'll wear glittery shoes. You'll express your womanhood. Why is that important to do, you think?
I think there are two ways you can look at it, right? Because definitely all of these situations are recognizable, and you can be in a room full of men who are just the fact that they are from a different demographic and you are the outlier already makes you feel like you have to work extra hard not to be the outsider. And so you can do two things. Either you can try and blend in very well so that you become as perceived as one of the guys, or you can just completely stand out and be okay with it. And so I think I've observed, especially from Faleke, and I have actually adopted as well a little bit in my behavior, is that she would go to this big pitch presentation in front of investors, and she would be the only woman in a glitter skirt with a pink shirt and a bow on her neck or something of that sort. Whereas before I started working at Rockamore, I used to work in Novo Nordisk, and I had a full wardrobe of gray suits and corporate jackets and trying to make myself feel like I belong because I look the way they look and because I am expected to fit in there. And then when I started working at Rockamore, I've never opened those clothes again. Like I've never worn them because it's not my style, but I felt like, oh, okay, so it's fine for me to be taken seriously and to have ambitions and to be valued for my opinions and for my work without having to look that certain way. So for me personally as well, I think it changed since I've been working with her in the company.
That's a very interesting bridge to a discussion that's been going on in Denmark for the past few months, or maybe the last month or so, about if women can actually be taken seriously if they wear, I think it was pink glittery nails, our former Prime Minister said, and glittery shoes. And I know that Rockamore was also involved in that discussion. But Milena, going into a room that's full of men in grey suits, it must take a lot of courage to then pick a big pink bow instead of the grey suit like they're wearing. How did you deal with that?
I think the first few times it's probably terrifying, and then as everything else, you just have to, if you feel like that's what's right for you, you have to just go with it. And I think that's just a general thing, like you put yourself out of your comfort zone. And I think it's very comfortable in any social situation to try and fit in. Like that's a natural instinct. Everyone wants to be perceived as part of the inner club. But once you make your choice and your decision, okay, I'm going to stand out and I'm okay with that personally, then you just have to stick with it. And you have to go through the fact it's going to be uncomfortable until it is comfortable. So you just have to push through until you get there. Because if you think it's too scary and you give up too easy, then you kind of don't get there in the end.
I wonder if this is something you recognize, Sasha, that in a male-dominated world, which entrepreneurship obviously is when you look at the statistics, I mean, it's quite depressing to look at, I'm just going to be honest with you. And I wonder if you've ever had to tone down your femininity or felt like you had to kind of tone down being a woman?
I haven't at this stage in my professional career. I think I'm in my mid-40s and I don't care what anyone thinks. I gave up caring what anyone thought. A few years ago, I dyed my hair pink during lockdown. Sometimes I have green nails. I have a few tattoos. I'll wear sneakers to an investor meeting, right? Because you're allowed to actually. However, I did grow up in investment banking, and I can remember being in my 20s and being told that my turtleneck was too tight and it was distracting the currency traders. And I needed to get some looser clothing, and being absolutely sort of devastated because I thought if the turtleneck went all the way up to here that I was probably pretty safe, but no, it was fit too tight. So I have experience, and I've had to actually give that advice once to a junior female member on my team who just had way too much cleavage, right? And it was distracting people, and I found myself on the other side of the table having to give that advice. And I think it's quite complicated because, on the one hand, you want to be able to express yourself, right? That's everyone's right. On the other hand, if everyone's talking about something that doesn't have to do with a merit-based discussion, they're talking about your looks, then I think you have sort of set yourself up to be at a disadvantage. So it's very, very tricky.
Yeah, and that makes it even more important for us to talk about. I was going to say, Sasha, but what you're describing is something that's got a lot to do with, the culture we're in, the specific people in your workplace. are you the only woman there, and so on. So it's very, very complex, and it's got a lot to do with everyone else. How do you personally deal with it? Like, what can you do single-handedly as a female entrepreneur with this?
I think the best thing you can do is to role model, right? And to make it safe for other women on your team or other people that you might be mentoring, and to role model with confidence, the behavior, which is to express yourself and not let it be something that is the point of the conversation, and to have the confidence to sort of put that to the side and focus the conversation on the things that are important. So your product, your customers, your traction, etc. Yeah, I think that we're all constantly role modeling to everyone that we work with, and that's the best thing you can do.
So this is something you spoke very passionately about when we spoke beforehand as well. And I have one thing written down from our conversation. You said you can either choose to look at your gender, being a woman, as something that's a disadvantage to you, or you can choose to see it as a superpower. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
I think I said a secret weapon, if I remember correctly. But yeah, it is. I think ultimately there's only so much you can do. We should obviously all continue to work towards a more gender equal world. But in the meantime, you get to wake up every day and have a mindset about whether or not your gender is a disadvantage or it's a secret weapon. And I think, choosing the latter proactively then helps to make that be realized, and going about there's a lot of things that women are really, really good at. We're good at connecting with other humans, right? In generally, stereotypically speaking, we're good at maybe being more subtle or having a slower, sort of softer negotiation that takes, closing a deal over a longer time period. So I think knowing what your assets and strengths are, and then playing to them is not, would be my preferred mindset that I adopt every day when I wake up, instead of feeling hard done by.
And so, how do you feel when you wake up in the morning every day, about to go into work, to your fantastic craft beer that I can't wait to try in some way at some point? How do you kind of overcome these challenges and turn your gender into a secret weapon or a superpower, like Sasha said?
Every day when I wake up, I'm so thankful that I'm a woman. I think there's so much strength and power in the feminine that has been a really key part of culture and society for thousands of years. And we only really saw this domination of a masculine culture kind of maybe 2,500 years ago, where suddenly women, weren't heads of tribes anymore, and women were kind of considered to be the other, or witches, or women of power weren't considered to be the positive maternal influence that they have been. And I think this strength of women has always been there. It's been suppressed in society in modern times, but slowly it's coming back up again. And I feel that there's bigger conversations to have. And I'd like to know how many men are having an International Women's Day panel today, because I think that's what's going to be really important, is that how men are coming together to change the way that they're thinking. This isn't just about feminine and about feminism. It's about how, the fact that a woman needs to be aware about how much of her breast she has on show because of the way that a man will deal with it. Says more about the men than it does about the women. So I think there's bigger conversations that need to come back about how we can kind of support women in kind of being this feminine forward culture where people aren't scared of sexuality and they're not that scared of femininity, but also that men are then supported, because I feel that, there are a lot of men now who feel emancipated, and there are a lot of men who feel quite insecure about their place in society because of this power of the feminine, and it's coming back again, and women are coming together, and we're standing up and we're questioning things, and we're not taking what we have done for thousands of years. And I think, as a young man, there are a lot of doubts and insecurities to one's place in society, more so than women. I think women are coming together stronger than ever, and because of the female nature of caring and supporting and coming together and supporting each other, and a male culture of less of that, I think there's there's a worry that there's lots of young boys now that are going to be growing up kind of feeling quite insecure about their place in the world, because they've grown up around a male-dominated rhetoric, but that actually is unraveling now. So I'm extremely happy that I'm a woman, and you know, in our careers and in our industries that we work in, you know, there are lots of amazing supportive women in the beverage industry, not so much in brewing, but there are a few female-owned breweries and brewers, which is amazing. And I think I love being a woman, and I love the power that it has, and I love the fact that we're all coming together and supporting each other. So I wouldn't have it any other way.
Nice. But sorry, I was wondering when you were describing this thing about men or boys being worried they'll grow up to be emasculated and everything. How do you take like that conversation? Because, you know, it's not just women gaining something from feminism, it's also men. Because, you know, if you look at childcare or maternity, paternity leave, there's been a big discussion in Denmark over the last few years. Men are gaining some rights that were mainly something that women had before. So what are your thoughts? How do you go to that conversation?
Yeah, I think it's very much about, you know, both sides making sure that there's equality, and both sides are, you know, not being stuck in these gender specific roles. So why can't men have more time off for paternity leave? Why aren't we in a culture where it's completely natural for a man to say, I'm having 2 months off, I'm going to work from home and care for my child? You know, I think so together, men and women as just humans, you know, we all have to work together to make sure the next generation feel inclusive, feel like their roles aren't pigeonholed into one way or the other, and you know, men understanding that women coming up through business need to be supported, and this old kind of rhetoric and behavior that has been entrenched in business, and especially in the corporate world, is no longer acceptable. And I think that, you know, there needs to be that understanding as men get to have more, you know, maybe paternal rights when it comes to childcare, and have that understanding. At the same time, we have to understand that it's okay for a woman to say, I only want to spend a month at home after having a baby, and then I want to go back to work. And we need workplaces and we need companies to be able to open up that flexibility. And I think the conversation has to be about the equality of men and women rather than one getting one over the other. And it has to be a joint conversation. And it's crucial that men are involved in this conversation with us.
And Julie, you have these conversations all the time around the world when you are out promoting the menstrual cup from Ruby Cup. And you're Danish, so you know just as well as me that if you take International Women's Day and translate it into Danish, in direct translation back to English, it's International Battle Day. And so it's kind of has this confrontational word or connotation to it. So I wonder how you deal with having these conversations, which will hopefully eventually also lead to more women in business. I mean, from the beginning on, it's been a philosophy of mine and of the company as well, is that we really try to listen and learn. You know, we set out wanting to give Ruby Cup to people, get Ruby Cup out to people that can't afford or don't have access to period products, but absolutely without all the answers on how to do it. So I think for me, I feel extremely grateful that I can have conversations, or that I've gotten to have conversations with women from all kinds of layers of society, right? Extremely low income, tough environments, and more well-off women, and also having conversations with men and seeing that more and more men get into the conversation. I mean, we are obviously a women-led, very women majority team as well, working with this product, but we have males on our team, and the conversations with them are extremely giving, because they learn from us and we learn from them, and they become, you know, they champion women's rights. So yeah, I feel extremely grateful that I've gotten to learn, you know, about this from so many different aspects. And I think, as I mentioned in the introduction, your product is very, very related to equality around the world, to ensure equality for girls and women. So I just want to get started on the questions from everyone who is listening, because I think this might be a good one to give to you, Julie. Happy Women's Day. We are 70 participants in this meeting and only 10 are men. How do we get more men involved to ensure equality? I do not know a single modern business leader who looks more at gender than qualification. So how do we ensure that more women get the right qualification to take leadership if they do not already have them? And that is from Peter.
Well, from my point of view, I think one thing is obviously not having your period holding you back from participating in society. You know, there's a lot of things I think it's been mentioned on by everyone on this panel now. A lot of things are against women in terms of becoming entrepreneurs and becoming business leaders. But there are also very, very basic things. If you don't have anything to manage your period with, you can't participate in society on equal basis with everyone else. So that's one thing. And then getting men to understand why it's important that women can participate in society. Getting men to understand that there's actually an economic incentive to getting women into businesses. We always have this saying, especially with us, we work also with women in villages where you have this very community based culture. And it's like, when you educate a woman, or if you give a woman resources, then she will educate a village. You have this very, very sharing culture. You connect, you share with other people. So I think it's important to get men to understand why this is extremely important, and it will benefit them as well in the long run.
I think I'd like to pass the same question on to you, Milena. How do we get more men involved in this discussion about equality?
I think that's going back to what Julie was saying. I think it's important to involve men in as many conversations as possible, and showing it from the perspective of what is the gain for the entire group. So it's not just a gain for women for the sake of women, but how does the whole society or the whole community that you're focused on also benefiting from that? Again, going back to the communities that Julie was talking about, because we're also now funding a project in Kenya through the sales of some of our shoes, which would sponsor the planting of trees in Kenya. And the planters of the trees are women, but by empowering these women to be educated, to become farmers, to have the sources and the tools to then have an independent stream of income, this helps their families, their children, but also the local society as a whole. It helps their family economics. It helps their men also in relation to that. So it's not just, I think as long as we can make conversations about what does the whole society gain from this, and it's not just us women trying to talk about something for the sake of women, then it gets easier, and then people actually understand it, but maybe men don't often have to think about it, right? So if you bring up the topic, you are the first one who initiates the conversation. Most of them would be interested and probably would listen, but they need the initial spark of starting up the topic, of starting the conversation, and of starting a train of thought that might not have been there beforehand.
Let me just remind everyone listening, if you have questions for this super, super interesting panel, this is the time to write them down in the chat, and then I will make sure to pass them on. I'd like to take what you said, Milena, and pass it on to you, Sasha. And I'd like to challenge that idea a bit, that to get men on board, you have to make them understand that it also benefits them and it benefits society as a whole. Why is it not enough to just say we want women's right? Why is that not reason enough that women have more opportunities in life?
That is the billion-dollar question. I wish I knew the answer to that. And it's incredibly perplexing as well, because men have daughters, right? And I have, men often have very special relationships with their daughters. I have a wonderful relationship with my father, and how we can then, look at our children and not want the absolute best for them. I find the whole thing rather perplexing. And I don't actually know the answer. I'm sitting here trying to brainstorm and to think about what we could do to make it more of an agenda, a higher item on the agenda. And I don't know if maybe women, maybe we need to take some responsibility for it as well, because I'm not very comfortable. If I was listening to the ambassador speak earlier about all of the things that she's done in her career to fight for women's rights. And I was really, really impressed, and it made me realize that actually maybe I'm not doing that much. You know, once a year I do come and sit on a panel or two, and you know, sometimes I write a blog and you know, do some mentoring for female entrepreneurs. But it's not necessarily something that's super high on my agenda every day either, and maybe not enough of us as women are insisting that it's on the agenda, and then it's easy for it to get deprioritized over time, which might explain that we haven't seen really, really sort of dramatic changes, with the exception of trying to regulate or do quotas, etc. So it's an opportunity for reflection, and maybe I don't have the answer.
That's okay. It's just good to have the discussion. It's good to have a brainstorm all together, isn't it? I want to take another question. This is from Rosie Miller, and she writes, there seems to be a social stereotype that women are more risk-averse investors than men. Do you think this is why some people in finance, thinking especially about the old wild white male accountant that Zoe mentioned earlier, seem to feel uncomfortable having conversations about finance with women? What do you think financial institutions in particular should do to stop stereotyping women in this way? So I think maybe you should be allowed to start with that one and try and answer that.
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, as the times are changing, you know, that old white accountant that I sat in front of is probably retired now, and you are seeing there's probably, you know, a more senior woman, I'd hope to think, that work in their office now. So, you know, we are seeing that there are more women in these environments, but I think it's key that there are, you know, senior women in positions where, you know, they are going to be the face of institutions. And, you know, when young girls are growing up, either if they're using the services or if they want to become part of those services, that they're seeing that there are, you know, women within the organization in senior positions. And it, you know, we know that businesses need to look at their boards, and, you know, they need to be more colored, they need to be more female, they need to be, you know, more diverse in terms of backgrounds and ethnicity and religion and all different types of experience. And it's very slow to change. You know, as we heard before, that the stats aren't as positive as we may be, well, certainly not as positive as I thought they were, but they are slowly changing. And I think it's down to ourselves, women in business, and, you know, women in more senior positions in politics, to kind of push it forward. You know, we're seeing some amazing inspirational leaders coming up. Jacinta Ardern in New Zealand has been a fantastic influence into what women are doing in the future. I think even now I saw she's going to make sanitary products free to all children in schools from this year, which is an amazing step forward when it comes to kind of equality around women and periods. And I think getting more women in senior positions is key, and getting them to be inspirational leaders that kind of make these institutions less threatening. And that's something that men need to be involved with. You know, it's not something that we can do on our own.
And sorry, I'd just like to pass this next question on to you as well to start with. This is Sophie asking, in our strive for equality, which I of course stand 100% behind, is there a danger we tip the scale? And then I'm just going to shorten it down a little bit here. While it's important to achieve equality, is there a need to respect some natural boundaries, such as with newborns? While one size fits all, what can businesses and governments do to allow more of the decision making to happen at home or in such structure needed top down?
Again, I think it's about, you know, opening up and having an equal conversation. In terms, did you say it was in relation to childcare?
Yeah, I think that's what Sophie is interested in.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's always hard. We as women have to physically have the child, so, you know, we're always going to need to have that more time off just before the birth, after the birth. It's always going to be something that is going to affect the woman, and it's going to affect your position. And this is something that we need to break down and have those conversations within large corporations and HR teams, that it's not just about, you know, making the workplace more flexible for women that want to take time off to have children and then reintegrating back into the workplace, but also opening it up to men to say, you know, why can't, you know, men have more time off for maternity, for paternity as well? So I think we've talked about this year on year, and it keeps going round. And even though things are improving, it's something, you know, we need to have a stronger shakeup. I think every HR department across the world needs to be sitting down today, if not yesterday, and saying, you know, what are we really doing to make this more equal? What are we doing to make it easier for women to have children and for men to have children, and to really level that playing field? And these conversations, we talk about them every International Women's Day. Childcare and pay gap are the two things that keep coming back again and again and again. And they're the two things that are very slowly changing. And I think that's something that, you know, people today need to say, right, what are we doing? And actually start really shaking things up, because there's a lot of talk about it, but the progress is nowhere near as fast as we need it to happen.
I'd like to finish our talk, because as expected, time has just gone by, you know, in a heartbeat. So each and every one of you are going to get 1 minute to give your best advice for the other women and men listening in on this, as to how to get more women in business and to get more equality. Julie, let's start with you.
Well, I think conversation and information is crucial. I think of you know, feminism in business and so on. I think of it as, if we try to think of it in an inclusive way. If we have these conversations, if the old white male CFO is feeling uncomfortable with a woman, or having conversations about this with a woman, then, you know, there's a problem in him feeling threatened. You know, we should see it as this is actually adding a woman to the conversation, will actually enrich it, and it will enrich my understanding of whatever the subject matter is. So yeah, I think thinking about it from like inclusion, and that it adds something rather than extract from something, to include women in business. Yeah.
Thank you, Julie. Milena, straight onwards to you. We're a little short on time now. So yes, if you could give us your best advice you'd like listeners to have. Here you are, 1 minute.
Yeah, I think probably the best advice, and also based on this conversation, one thing that really stuck out to me is the importance of helping other women, because I think some studies have shown that men are also naturally looking more towards other men and peers as inspiration, whereas women tend to look at that as a source of doubt, as a source of comparing yourself and feeling less competent or less confident. So if we can remember to get inspiration from others and then help each other, so if you can support another woman on her way whenever you can, that will make a big difference.
And Sasha, 1 minute, your best advice. Here you are. Go.
Just, you know, if you care about equality and diversity, which I'm assuming everyone here does because they've joined the panel, then make sure to set aside the time and the funding to support those outcomes in your organization. So it takes a lot longer, and it's a lot harder for us to find really high quality female engineers for our app development. But that's why we restart the recruitment process a few months in advance, so that we can make sure that we've got a gender balanced team. And I think recognizing that it may be a little bit harder to have equality and diversity, but if you care about it, then you've got to set aside the time to make it happen. Time and investment.
Thank you, Sasha. And Zoe, you get the final word. Your best advice on behalf of this discussion. Go.
I think it's about support, and echoing what Milena said as well, about women need to support other women. And I think, you know, being open to be contactable, being open to share your experiences and your advice is key to younger women and women already within business, you know, because it's great to have a sounding block and to be able to support each other. The reason why the boys club was so hard to break is because it was a really solid club and they really stuck together to support each other. And I'm not saying we want to create the women's club that shuts out the men, but there's power in that. There's power in the men coming together and really supporting each other. And I think women need to do the same. So whatever stage you are in your career, whether you're starting out, whether you've been in business for 40 years, I think take the time to help talk to other women in your industry and girls coming up within the industry to support them, and just create that culture of openness and that new kind of system where we're all here to support each other. I think that's key.
Thank you, Zoe. We've used up every single second we had. I'm very pleased about that. This was so interesting. Thank you to you, the panelists, and it was a pleasure to do this. There was some incredible advice as well in the chat outside. If you click that button about how to small talk with men, that I found quite funny. But this is all the time we had, so that's it from me and for us.
And let me round up, because we got a follow-on program right after you. Thank you so much to all of you here in the panel, Tina, for great moderation. And I think you hit it on the nail, very inspiring, which we were hoping to set out from the beginning of it. Right now, my colleague Diane, she's pasting in the chat a link to the follow-on meeting now about investment and finance and inspiration and leadership there. That program will continue on the Zoom platform, so do make sure you take yourself a minute or two to click through if you don't have the link already, and continue over there. For everyone else who cannot join us, thank you very much for being part of this today. It's been great. We are all here, Chambers of Commerce associations, prepared to help. Thank you very much to the sponsors, Goodwill, Ruby Cup, Investor. Without their support, this would be really difficult to make a discussion like this. Thank you very much again. Have a good day, and hope to see you shortly in the next session. Goodbye.